Is the will of the people sometimes not true justice? Were both Jews and Gentiles guilty of the crucifixion of Jesus? Let's look at Luke 23. After the Jewish council, where was Jesus taken next? Did Pilate find him guilty? Then the whole company of them arose and brought him to Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man misleading our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king." And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered him, "You've said so." Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, "I find no guilt in this man." But they were urgent, saying, "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee even to this place." Did Herod and his men treat Jesus with contempt and mock him? When Pilate heard this, he asked if the man was a Galilean. Finding that he was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem during those days. Herod was very glad to see Jesus. For a long time he'd wanted to see him because he'd heard about him and was hoping to see some miracle performed by him. So he kept asking him questions, but Jesus didn't answer him. The chief priests and the scribes stood by, vehemently accusing him. Then Herod, with his soldiers, treated him with contempt, mocked him, dressed him in a brilliant robe, and sent him back to Pilate. That very day Herod and Pilate became friends. Previously, they'd been hostile toward each other. Sent back to Pilate, what did the crowd want him to do with Jesus? Then Pilate called the high priests, the other leaders, and the people together and told them, "You brought this man to me as one who turns the people against the government, and here in your presence I've examined him and found him not guilty of the charges you make against him. Neither does Herod, because he sent him back to us. Indeed, this man has done nothing to deserve death, so I'll punish him and let him go." Now he was obligated to release someone for them at the festival. But they all shouted out together, "Away with this man! Release Barabbas for us!" This man had been put in prison for murder and for a revolt that had taken place in the city. But Pilate wanted to let Jesus go, so he appealed to them again. But they continued to shout, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Did Pilate bend to the will of the crowd and sentence Jesus? He said to them the third time, "Why? What evil has he done? I've found no cause of death in him. I'll therefore chastise him and let him go." And they were instant with loud voices, requiring that he might be crucified. And the voices of them and the chief priests prevailed. And Pilate gave sentence that it should be as they required. And he released to them him that for sedition and murder was cast into prison, whom they desired, but he delivered Jesus to their will. What did Jesus say to some of the women mourning him? And when they led him away, they took hold of a man, Simon of Cyrene, coming in from the country, and placed on him the cross to carry behind Jesus. And following him was a large multitude of the people, and of women who were mourning and lamenting him. But Jesus, turning to them, said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, stop crying for me, but cry for yourselves and your children. For behold, the days are coming when they'll say, Blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed. Then they'll begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. For if they do these things when the tree is green, what'll happen when it's dry?" Now 2 others also, who were criminals, were being led away to be put to death with him. What was Jesus' remarkable statement on the cross? And when they came to the place called the Skull, there they crucified him and the criminals, one on the right and the other on the left. But Jesus was saying, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." And they cast lots, dividing his garments among themselves. And the people stood by watching. And even the rulers were sneering at him, saying, "He saved others. Let him save himself if this is the Christ of God, his chosen one." The soldiers also ridiculed him, coming up to him, offering him sour wine, and saying, "If you're the king of the Jews, save yourself." Now there was also an inscription above him, This is the King of the Jews." What did the criminals hanging beside Jesus say to him? What did Jesus say to one? One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other criminal rebuked him. "Don't you fear God," he said, "since you're under the same sentence. We're punished justly, for we're getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus answered him, "Truly I tell you, today you'll be with me in paradise." What were among Jesus' last words? What did a centurion say? Now it was about the 6th hour, and there was darkness all over the earth until the 9th hour. Then the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was torn in two. And when Jesus had cried out with a loud voice, he said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." Having said this, he breathed his last. So when the centurion saw what had happened, he glorified God, saying, "Certainly this was a righteous man." And the whole crowd who came together to that sight, seeing what had been done, beat their breasts and returned. But all his acquaintances and the women who followed him from Galilee stood at a distance watching these things. What did Joseph, one of the Jewish religious leaders, do? Now there was a good and righteous man named Joseph. He was a member of the Jewish High Council, but he'd not agreed with the decision and actions of the other religious leaders. He was from the town of Arimathea in Judea, and he was waiting for the kingdom of God to come. He went to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Then he took the body down from the cross and wrapped it in a long sheet of linen cloth and laid it in a new tomb that had been carved out of rock. This was done late on Friday afternoon, the day of preparation, as the Sabbath was about to begin. As his body was taken away, the women from Galilee followed and saw the tomb where his body was placed. Then they went home and prepared spices and ointments to anoint his body. But by the time they were finished, the Sabbath had begun, so they rested as required by the law. Is the will of the people sometimes not true justice? Were both Jews and Gentiles guilty of the crucifixion of Jesus? You decide.